It started like any other jungle tour. Laughs, cameras clicking, guides giving safety tips no one really thinks they'll need. But within minutes, the mood shifted. A rustle in the bushes, a low growl, then silence. What emerged from the trees didn't just frighten the tourists, it stunned even the guides. And what this gorilla did next didn't just leave jaws on the jungle floor. It made headlines around the globe. Let's find out. A cry in the wild. The jungle was a living maze, a tangle of vines and shadows that swallowed the sun. Clara knelt on the damp earth, her ankle throbbing like a drumbeat, each pulse a reminder of her fall down a rough slope. Sweat stung her eyes as she clutched her useless camera, its lens cracked, her only tether to the world she had left behind. Nightfall crept closer, painting the leaves in hues of purple and gold, and the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of moss and something sharper, fear. She was lost, miles from the village, her guide's warnings echoing like a ghost. Stay close. The jungle doesn't forgive. Then it came. A low, growling groan, not human, slicing through the chatter of birds. Clara froze, her breath catching like a hook in her throat. It wasn't far, maybe 20 yards through the mist, a sound so raw it felt like pain itself calling out. Her mind raced. She had come to this Central African wilderness chasing photos of mountain gorillas, creatures so rare that barely 1,000 were left. She had read that seeing one was a privilege, not a promise, but this was terror, primal and cold, clawing at her chest. Was it a predator? Or something worse, something wounded, desperate? She wanted to run, but her ankle screamed no. The groan came again, louder, pulling at something deeper than fear, curiosity perhaps, or madness. What happened next didn't just save Clara's life. It stunned a village, sparked whispers of forest spirits, and lit up screens across the globe, from social media to newsrooms in distant cities. How could one moment, one cry in the wild, rewrite her story and shock the world? To understand, we must go back to the choice that led her here, alone, with only the jungle listening. Lost in the green maze. Hours earlier, the jungle had been Clara's dream come true. She had arrived in a remote Central African village, her camera slung over her shoulder, chasing shots that could capture the wild's untamed heart. A city photographer with a knack for finding beauty in chaos, she had saved for years to join this trek, lured by tales of mountain gorillas, creatures so human-like they mourned their dead, their families tighter than most city clans. She had read they shared 98% of our DNA, a fact that stuck like a splinter, making this trip feel like meeting distant kin. But now, as she stumbled through a sea of vines, that dream was unraveling fast. It started with a bird, a flash of crimson wings darting past the group's guided trail. Clara's lens twitched. She needed that shot. Her guide, Musa, a wiry man with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, had warned them at dawn. Stick together. The jungle's no place for wanderers. His voice carried stories of lost trails and sudden storms, but Clara, high on adrenaline, barely listened. The group, 6 tourists and 2 porters, walked slowly, snapping photos of ferns and the monkey chattering overhead. The group was walking too slowly for her when the bird vanished into a bamboo thicket. She muttered a quick, "Be right back," and slipped away, her boots crunching softly, promising herself just 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 30, then the jungle closed around her like a fist. Vines hooked her jeans, their thorns drawing pinpricks of blood. Parrots screeched, their calls mocking her as she spun, searching for the trail. Her phone, useless with no signal, stayed buried in her pack. She had scoffed at packing a compass, trusting her instincts instead. Foolish, she realized now, as the sun dipped lower, its light fracturing through leaves into shards of gold. The air grew thick, heavy with damp earth and the tang of rotting fruit, pressing against her chest. She called out, Musa's name, anyone's, but the jungle swallowed her voice, spitting back only silence. Then it dawned on her that she had lost track of the group in the middle of nowhere. Clara's ankle ached from an earlier stumble, a root catching her boot as she had chased that cursed bird. She limped to a stream, its water glinting like a lifeline, and knelt to splash her face, hoping to clear the panic fogging her mind. Village stories flickered, tales of gorillas moving like ghosts through these woods, their clans led by silverbacks who would die for their own. She'd laughed then, charmed by the idea of such loyalty in the wild. Now it felt less like folklore and more like a warning. Gorillas weren't pets, they were raw power, capable of snapping spines if provoked. Yet something about their closeness, families that grieved, protected, made her pause, her fingers tightening on her camera. What would it mean to see one, not through a lens, but eye to eye? Dusk crept in, painting the jungle in deep indigo. Clara's breath hitched. Night would hide trails entirely. She stood, wincing as her ankle protested, and forced herself forward, aiming for the stream's flow, praying it led to the village. Her pack felt heavier, the cracked lens inside a reminder of her recklessness. She'd wanted adventure, not this. A maze with no exit, each step deeper into nowhere. Then it came, sharp and sudden, cutting through the drone of insects. A groan, low and ragged, not 10 yards away. Not a bird, not a breeze, a beast, alive and close, its pain echoing in her bones. Clara froze, her pulse a hammer in her throat. The jungle wasn't empty anymore. Something was out there, suffering, watching, and it wasn't far. The trapped giant, a desperate plea. Clara's boots sank deeper into the jungle's pulse, each step a gamble against her swollen ankle. The groan she had heard wasn't a trick of the wind. It was real, raw, pulling her forward through curtains of mist and thorn. Her camera dangled useless, its cracked lens a weight around her neck, but her hands trembled for a different reason now. The sound grew louder, a low rumble that vibrated in her ribs, not 10 yards ahead. She parted a tangle of bamboo, her breath shallow, and there it was, a sight that stopped her heart cold. In a small clearing, lit by slivers of fading dusk, a silverback gorilla thrashed against a poacher's net. The beast was massive, his shoulders broad as a doorway, his fur matted with sweat and blood where the ropes bit into his leg. Scars crisscrossed his chest, badges of battles fought to shield his clan. Silverbacks, Clara recalled, would die for their families, charging leopards or worse to keep them safe. But this giant was trapped, his power caged by cruel knots, each struggle tightening the snare. His eyes, dark and wide, flickered with pain, not rage, and that gaze hit Clara like a fist. It wasn't just an animal, it was a king, dethroned, pleading. Her first instinct was to run. She had read the stats. Gorillas could lift cars, their bite stronger than a lion's. One swipe could end her, especially now, limping and alone, miles from Moose's trail. The village stories echoed, respect the wild, don't tempt it. Yet something held her, rooted her boots to the mud. That groan wasn't a threat, it was a cry, the kind she had heard in her own throat when hope felt far. She thought of the poaching she'd overheard Musa curse. Nets like this one stole dozens of gorillas yearly, their hands sold as trophies, their young caged for profit. This wasn't just a trap, it was a death sentence, and she had stumbled into its jaws. Clara's fingers brushed the pocket knife in her pack, its blade barely 3 inches, laughable against the net's thick cords. Her ankle throbbed, urging retreat. Her city sense screamed for safety, for the village's warm lanterns. But leaving meant abandoning him, this creature who had ruled these woods, who had maybe led a family now scattered and waiting. She pictured them, hidden in the fog, their hoots silenced by his absence. Gorillas grieved, she knew, their bonds as deep as any humans. She'd seen photos of them cradling their lost, eyes hollow. Could she walk away, knowing he would die here, alone? She took a step, then another, her pulse hammering like rain on leaves. The gorilla's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring, catching her scent. A growl rumbled low, not loud but sharp, a warning that froze her mid-breath. His eyes locked on hers, and for a moment, she saw everything. Fear, defiance, a spark of something she couldn't name. Clara dropped her gaze, remembering Moose's advice from the trek's start. No staring. It's a challenge. She crouched low, her knife hand shaking, and murmured nonsense. Soft words, half to him, half to herself. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just hold on." The gorilla stilled, his growl fading to a huff, like he was weighing her as much as she weighed him. Clara edged closer, mud sucking at her knees, the net's weave now clear, ropes braided tight, stained with old blood. Her knife caught a strand, sawing slowly, each scrape loud as a gunshot in the jungle's hush. She whispered again, her voice a thread against the dark. "We'll get you out. Just stay with me." The gorilla's breathing slowed, his eyes tracking her hands, not her face. Trust wasn't there, not yet, but something was, a fragile pause in the wild's brutal math. She had cut halfway through a rope when the jungle betrayed her. Twigs snapped behind the clearing, sharp and deliberate, not animal, but human. Voices muttered, low and rough, their words lost, but their intent clear. Clara's knife froze, her stomach lurching. The poachers, men who had set this trap, weren't far, their steps crunching closer, drawn by the gorilla's groans or her own clumsy noise. Her eyes darted to the silverback, his gaze now on the trees, ears twitching. He knew it too. Time was bleeding out, and Clara was no longer just a rescuer. She was prey, caught in a trap not meant for her. Freedom and fury, a dangerous bond. Clara's knife quivered as it hacked the last strand, her hands numb from the fight against the coarse rope. The poacher's net slumped to the ground like a defeated beast, and the silverback burst free, a juggernaut of flesh and fury rising from captivity. His roar ripped through the jungle, a savage howl that jolted Clara's spine and sent leaves spiraling from the treetops. She staggered back, her ankle giving way, a flare of pain dropping her to her knees in the muck. The gorilla stood tall, his silvered hide shimmering in the twilight's last gasp, a living fortress of muscle and scars. Her lungs seized, dread pooling cold in her chest. Had she just woken a storm? The silverback's stare drilled into her, eyes like embers in the gloom, fierce and fathomless. Clara braced for the worst. Village lore cast these giants as sentinels, smashing through danger to shield their own, their bellows a prelude to ruin for any fool in their path. Yet he held still. He lumbered closer, his knuckles carving ruts in the dirt, and stopped, his snout hovering near her trembling form. His breath rolled over her, a gust of heat laced with the tang of moss and blood, and then he did something unthinkable. He grazed her elbow with a hand that could snap her in two, a nudge so faint it barely stirred the air. Clara's terror faltered, awe clawing its way up her throat. This wasn't wrath, it was a spark, a wild king marking her deed with a glance of grace. He huffed, a murmur deep as thunder, and turned, his shape dissolving into the jungle's shroud. Her heart thudded, the echo of his touch a lifeline in the chaos. She had grazed the edge of a creature whose kind anchored these woods, their clans woven tight by bonds that rivaled any family she had known. But the jungle didn't let her linger. A shout punched through the haze, human, coarse, dripping with spite. 3 men barreled into the clearing, their boots mashing the net's tatters, hands armed with ropes and a chipped machete. Poachers, their faces carved with hard years, eyes blazing with loss. The tallest, a sinewy man with a scar curling his lip, spat at her tracks. She broke it. "City trash cost us our meat." Clara's insides knotted. Musa had raged about bushmeat runners, how they carved gorilla families apart. Hundreds felled each season, their flesh peddled cheap while their kin mourned in silence. She hauled herself up, her ankle a pulsing wound, every step a battle toward the undergrowth. The stream's distant trickle taunted her, a faint promise of escape, but the poacher's glares pinned her like a snare. "She'll do," the scarred man rasped, lunging, his rope coiling around her forearm, jerking her off balance. Clara flailed, her free hand grasping at vines, but the second man, a hulking figure with a broken nose, yanked her pack, snapping its straps. Her camera spilled out, its lens crunching under his heel, a shard of her hope ground to dust. "Boss'll take her instead," he growled, his fingers digging into her shoulder until she bit back a cry. The third, a lean shadow with darting eyes, circled, muttering, "This is better than empty hands." Clara swung her good leg, kicking up dirt, but pain drowned her fight, her strength diminishing as they dragged her toward the trees, her boots scraping futile lines in the mud. The dusk grew thick, tense, like a held breath. Then it broke. A roar, not hers, not theirs, blasted from the jungle's fringe, a sound that shook the roots and stilled the air. Clara's pulse soared. The silverback dominated there, his chest ballooned, silver fur stark against the dark, his fists slamming the ground in a rhythm of warning. The poachers flinched, ropes loosening, their nerves cracking under his glare. He didn't advance, just stood, a monument of intent, a king rewriting the rules. Clara caught his eyes, a split-second flare, and saw it. Not anger, but a debt inscribed in the wild. The scarred man hissed, "Get back!" His voice splintering, fear overtaking greed. They pulled her still, faltering now, steps unsteady. Clara's hope flickered, trapped, sinking, until the jungle answered back. The Gorillas Stand, a heart-stopping rescue. Clara's wrists burned under the poacher's ropes, her boots dragging ruts in the jungle floor as the three men hauled her deeper into the dusk. The scarred leader's grip was a vice, his breath hissing with curses. "She'll talk, or she'll pay," while the hulking brute behind her chuckled, his broken nose flaring with each tug. The wiry one trailed, machete swinging at his side, muttering about their boss's wrath. The stream's faint gurgle had faded to a memory, her hope of reaching the village slipping with every step. She had freed the silverback, felt his nudge, but now he was a ghost in the green, and she was theirs, caught in a trap she had sprung on herself. The poacher's words gnawed at her. They'd lost a haul worth days of meat, a gorilla whose clan would scatter without him, hunted for profit in a trade that bled these woods dry. The jungle pulsed, thick with menace, until a roar shattered it, a sound not of man, but of primal fury, rolling from the shadows like a landslide. Clara's heart leapt, a wild surge of hope as the silverback stormed into view, his silver fur a beacon in the gloom. He loomed at the clearing's edge, chest swollen, scars stark against his hide, his fists pounding the earth in a rhythm that shook the roots. The poachers froze, ropes slackening, their bravado crumbling like ash. He didn't charge, just advanced, slow and deliberate, his bellow a wall of sound that pinned them where they stood. The scarred man's eyes widened, his grip faltering. "Back, beast!" he spat, but his voice cracked, fear swallowing his snarl. The silverback lunged closer, stopping yards away, his knuckles grinding the dirt, his roar peaking into a thunderclap that sent the wiry man stumbling, machete clattering to the ground. Clara saw it, those eyes, fierce yet steady, locking on her for a heartbeat, a spark of intent she couldn't name. He reared up, towering, his chest a drum he beat with fists like hammers, each thud a warning that echoed through the trees. The hulking poacher cursed, dropping her pack, its contents spilling, her broken camera, a water flask, relics of her city life. The scarred man yanked her arm, dragging her back, but the silverback stepped forward again, his presence a tide pushing them off balance. "Move, now!" the leader barked, but the wiry one bolted, vanishing into the vines, leaving the others reeling. Clara seized the chaos. The scarred man's grip slipped as he turned to yell, and she twisted free, her bound hands fumbling for the fallen machete. Her fingers grazed its handle, slick with mud, and she swung it clumsily, slicing the ropes around her wrists. The hulking man lunged, his fist grazing her shoulder, but the silverback roared again, a blast that sent him staggering into his scarred partner. Clara bolted, her ankle screaming, pain a white-hot spike with every step. She didn't look back. Couldn't, just ran, the silverback's bellows fading behind her, a shield she didn't deserve but clung to. The poacher's shouts dwindled, their pursuit faltering under the gorilla's stand, his fury buying her seconds she couldn't waste. She aimed for the stream, its sound a lifeline threading through the dark. Vines lashed her face, thorns snagging her jeans, but she pushed on, her breath ragged, her vision spotting with exhaustion. Blood soaked her sock, the gash from her earlier fall reopened, each stride a gamble against collapse. She had saved him. Now he had saved her, a debt repaid in full. But the jungle wasn't done. Her good leg caught a root, and she pitched forward, tumbling down a slope, the world spinning, green, black, green again. She hit the stream's bank hard, her head cracking against a stone, pain blooming bright and blinding. Water lapped her fingers, cold and real, as her sight blurred, the silverback's roar a distant echo in her skull. Clara lay there, chest heaving, the jungle's hum closing in. The poachers hadn't followed. His stand had broken them, scattered them like leaves in a gale. She tried to rise, her hands clawing the mud, but her body betrayed her as strength bled out with her blood. The stream glittered, a cruel tease of safety so close, yet her limbs wouldn't move, pinned by pain and fatigue. Darkness crept at the edges of her eyes, the wild swallowing her whole. She had escaped, but at what cost? The silverback's roar lingered, a lifeline fading, and Clara slipped under, unconscious by the water's edge, her fate dangling, until the jungle wasn't done with her yet. The village's mercy. A hero returns. Clara lay sprawled by the stream, her cheek pressed to cold mud, the water's edge lapping at her limp fingers. Her ankle throbbed, a dull fire beneath the blood-soaked sock, and her head pulsed where it had struck the stone, a haze blurring the jungle's edges. The silverback's roar still echoed in her skull, a fading lifeline that had scattered the poachers and bought her this fragile escape. Night had swallowed the sky, stars piercing through the canopy, their light too weak to guide her back. Her pack was gone, her camera shattered. Only the stream's whisper remained, a cruel tease of the village she couldn't reach. Exhaustion pinned her down, her breath shallow, the wild claiming her as its own. She had saved a king, and he had saved her in return. Yet here she was, broken, alone, slipping into the dark. A rustle broke the silence, not the heavy crash of poachers, but softer, deliberate. Clara's eyes fluttered open, her heart stuttering as shadows moved through the mist. Voices followed, low and urgent, in a tongue she didn't know, threaded with worry. Torchlight flickered, cutting through the gloom, and a face emerged. Musa, her guide, his sharp eyes wide with relief. "She's here!" he called, dropping to his knees beside her, his hands gentle as they brushed mud from her brow. Behind him, 4 villagers fanned out, their faces etched with concern, carrying staffs and a woven stretcher. "We've been searching since dusk," Musa said, his voice tight. "You didn't come back. Thought the jungle took you." Clara tried to speak, her throat raw, but only a rasp escaped. The silverback stand flashed in her mind, his roar, her flight, and she managed a weak nod. The villagers lifted her onto the stretcher, their hands steady, their murmurs a balm against the night's chill. Musa led the way, torch raised, carving a path through vines and roots. The trek back was a blur, leaves brushing her face, the stream's gurgle growing louder, then fainter as they climbed a rise. Clara's eyes drifted shut, the sway of the stretcher lulling her, pain dulled by their care. She woke to the village's glow, huts of mud and thatch, lanterns casting warm pools of light, the hum of voices rising like a tide. They carried her to a low-roofed shelter, where an elder woman with silver-streaked hair knelt beside her, her hands deft as she pressed damp herbs to Clara's ankle. "Rest, child," she murmured, her voice soft as the jungle's breath. "The forest spared you." Days bled into nights, the village wrapping Clara in its mercy. Musa sat by her cot, his face creased with guilt for letting her wander, though she waved it off. She had chosen her path. The elder's herbs worked slow magic, the swelling in her ankle easing, the gash clotting under their care. Between sips of bitter tea, Clara pieced out her tale, the silverback in the net, her knife's desperate work, the poacher's ropes, and his roar that broke them. Musa's eyes widened, the villagers leaning in, their whispers turning to gasps. "A forest king," the elder said, her gaze distant. "They guard these woods, but poachers take them. Too many gone." Clara nodded, her voice steadying. "He saved me in return. I would be dead without him." The village buzzed with her story, a current running through the huts. Musa explained how guerrilla treks funded their lives. Tourists like her kept rangers patrolling, nets at bay, a fragile shield against the bushmeat trade that stole hundreds yearly. "You didn't just save him," he said, his tone firm. "You showed us they're still here, fighting." Days later he returned, his face grim but triumphant. "Rangers tracked your poachers. 2 caught, nets burned. Your words pointed the way." Clara's chest tightened. Her stumble had struck a blow, a ripple she hadn't foreseen. The elder pressed a carved wooden gorilla into her hands, its eyes tiny beads of hope. "You're one of us now," she said, a smile cracking her weathered face. Clara stood at the village edge a week later, her ankles stiff but holding, the jungle stretching beyond like a green sea. The villagers gathered, their faces warm, their voices a chorus of thanks. She had come chasing a photo, found a king, and left a mark. Poachers caged, a silverback free. Musa squeezed her shoulder, his eyes on the trees. "He's out there, safe because of you." Clara clutched the carving, her throat thick, the wild's pulse still in her veins. Her story wasn't over, it was just beginning to spread. A legend born. The world watches. Clara stood at the village's edge, the carved gorilla heavy in her palm, its wooden eyes glinting with the morning sun. Her ankle held firm now, a dull ache beneath the bandages, the jungle sprawling beyond like a wild heartbeat she'd come to know. The villagers clustered behind her, their faces warm with farewells, Musa's hand lingering on her shoulder. "You brought us more than photos," he said, his voice steady. "You gave us a fight worth winning." Her pack was lighter, camera gone, replaced by the carving. But her chest swelled with something new, a tether to this place where she had faced a king and lived. She had come for a snapshot, but she's leaving with a story carved in scars and roars. Back at the village gate, Musa had shared her tale with a ranger who'd scribbled it down, eyes wide. A tourist nearby, phone in hand, filmed Clara's halting recount. The net, the poachers, the silverback stand, her voice breaking as she clutched the carving. That clip hit social media days later, a shaky frame of her mud-streaked face, captioned, "Gorilla saved her, she saved him." It exploded, 10 million views, comments flooding in. "Unreal, proof they're like us." The world watched, stunned, as her stumble in the wild became a beacon. Clara scrolled the posts from a borrowed laptop, her throat tight. Gorillas weren't just muscle, they were kin, their numbers dwindling to a whisper, barely 1,000 left, their homes shrinking under axes and greed. She boarded a rickety bus, the jungle fading in the dust, but the silverback's eyes stayed with her, fierce, steady, a trust she hadn't earned but carried now. Her story wasn't hers alone, it was his, the village's, a cry from a wild on the edge. One moment shocked the world, she thought, the carving warm in her grip. Imagine what we could do together. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.